By the summer of 2015, Los Angeles was still growing, but the water it depended on was already rationed. The city looked the same from above. Freeways moved, buildings rose, lawns stretched across hillsides in grids so vast they could be seen from space. But underneath that surface, something had changed. The water that made Los Angeles possible, the water that crossed deserts and mountains to reach 13 million faucets, was running low. Not gone, just controlled. And for the first time in decades, the city had to admit it didn't control the source. Los Angeles doesn't make its water. It never has. The Los Angeles River, despite its name, carries almost nothing. The aquifers beneath the city were drained decades ago. Every gallon that moves through the pipes comes from somewhere else. From the Colorado River, 300 miles east. From the Sierra Nevada mountains, 200 miles north. From reservoirs built before most of the city existed. This dependence was designed a century ago, engineered into permanence and then forgotten. People turned on faucets. Water appeared. That was the system, until the summer when it wasn't. Los Angeles gets its water from 3 main sources, and none of them are close. The largest is the Colorado River Aqueduct, completed in 1941, which moves water across the Mojave Desert through tunnels and canals. The second is the Los Angeles Aqueduct, built in 1913, which drains Mono Lake and the Owens Valley in the eastern Sierra Nevada. The third is the State Water Project, completed in 1973, which pulls from the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta in Northern California. Together, these systems deliver roughly 600,000 acre-feet of water to Los Angeles each year. But they depend on something the city cannot control: snowpack. In the mountains, snow falls each winter and melts each spring, feeding rivers and reservoirs. When snow is light, the rivers run low. When snow fails for years, the reservoirs drop. Between 2012 and 2016, California experienced its worst drought in 1,200 years. Snowpack in the Sierra Nevada fell to 5% of normal levels. Reservoirs across the state began to empty, and Los Angeles, sitting at the end of 3 long straws, began to feel the pressure. The drought didn't arrive suddenly, it accumulated. The first year, 2012, was dry but manageable. Water managers issued warnings, residents were asked to conserve voluntarily. Consumption dropped slightly, then returned to normal. The second year was worse. Reservoirs fell below 50%. Mandatory restrictions were discussed but not implemented. The state declared a drought emergency, but Los Angeles continued watering lawns, filling pools, washing driveways. The third year, 2014, broke records. The Sierra Nevada recorded the lowest snowpack in 5 centuries. Lake Mead, the reservoir behind Hoover Dam, dropped to its lowest level since it was filled in the 1930s. The State Water Project announced it would deliver 0 allocation to most contractors. For the first time, officials began using a word they had avoided: rationing. By early 2015, the situation was undeniable. Governor Jerry Brown stood on a brown hillside that should have been covered in snow and announced mandatory water reductions across California. For Los Angeles, that meant cutting consumption by 25%. There was no plan to replace the missing water. There was no reserve. The only option was to use less. On June 1, 2015, the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power implemented mandatory outdoor watering restrictions. Residents could water lawns only twice per week, on assigned days, and only before 9 in the morning or after 4 in the afternoon. Washing driveways and sidewalks with hoses was prohibited. Cars could only be washed with a shutoff nozzle. Broken sprinklers had to be repaired within 2 days. Restaurants were banned from serving water unless customers requested it. The restrictions were not suggestions. Violations carried fines starting at $100 and escalating with each offense. The department hired additional inspectors and set up a hotline for reporting waste. Within the first month, the city received over 10,000 complaints. Neighbors reported neighbors. Inspectors issued warnings. Enforcement teams photographed violations and mailed citations. The reaction was immediate. Lawn watering dropped by 40% in the first 2 weeks. Car washes saw business decline. Garden supply stores sold out of drought-tolerant plants.
Across the city, behavior changed not because people wanted to conserve, but because they had to. The invisible system had become visible, and it had limits.
By the fall of 2015, the lawns of Los Angeles had turned brown. Not everywhere, and not evenly, but enough to change the landscape. In the San Fernando Valley, entire blocks of grass died. In Beverly Hills, some estates kept their grounds green while others let them fade. In South Los Angeles, parks that had been irrigated for decades went dormant. The change was psychological as much as visual. For a century, green lawns had signaled success in a desert city. They proved that Los Angeles had conquered nature, that water was abundant, that the infrastructure worked. Brown lawns signaled the opposite. Some residents painted their dead grass green. Others ripped it out entirely, replacing it with gravel, succulents, and native plants that required no irrigation. The city offered rebates for lawn removal, $2 per square foot, and received applications for over 15 million square feet in a single year. Swimming pools, another symbol of abundance, began to empty. The city banned filling new pools and required covers on existing ones to reduce evaporation. Some homeowners drained their pools completely and converted them to skate parks or gardens. Others kept them full but stopped using them, the water sitting still and chemically balanced, waiting for restrictions to lift. The visible wealth of Los Angeles, the green and the blue, was disappearing. Enforcement escalated through the winter of 2015 and into 2016. The Department of Water and Power increased fines for repeat offenders, with some households receiving bills for over $500 in penalties. Inspectors began using aerial imagery to identify properties with suspiciously green lawns during restricted days. Water usage data was cross-referenced with satellite photos. Warnings became citations. Citations became liens. The city publicized the names of the worst offenders, releasing lists of addresses that had violated restrictions more than 10 times. Some were mansions in Bel Air and Hidden Hills. Others were apartment complexes in Mid-City and Koreatown. The public reaction was divided. Some praised the crackdown as necessary. Others called it invasive, a government overstep into private behavior. Lawsuits were filed challenging the city's authority to monitor water use so closely. All were dismissed. The courts ruled that during a declared emergency, conservation measures were legal and enforceable. But enforcement was inconsistent. Wealthy neighborhoods with private wells continued watering freely, their supplies exempt from city restrictions. Golf courses received variances, allowed to irrigate under agreements that predated the drought. Large corporations with negotiated contracts faced lower penalties than individual homeowners. The burden fell heaviest on those who had no alternatives: renters, apartment dwellers, and families in older neighborhoods with aging landscaping. The restrictions worked. Citywide water use dropped by 29% by early 2016, exceeding the state mandate. But trust in the system did not return. The impact of the drought was not distributed equally. In Brentwood and Pacific Palisades, homeowners installed expensive gray water recycling systems that captured shower and laundry water for irrigation. In South Los Angeles and Boyle Heights, families simply stopped watering. In wealthier neighborhoods, drought-tolerant landscaping became fashionable. Xeriscaping with designer succulents and imported gravel cost tens of thousands of dollars but signaled environmental awareness. In poorer neighborhoods, dead lawns were just dead lawns. The difference was not just aesthetic. Property values in areas with maintained landscaping remained stable or rose. In areas where lawns died and were not replaced, values stagnated. Renters had no control over landscaping decisions but faced the consequences in rising rents as landlords passed fine costs through to tenants. Some neighborhoods mobilized. Community groups in Echo Park and Highland Park organized water-sharing programs, distributing gray water collection barrels and teaching residents how to capture runoff. Schools in the valley installed synthetic turf on athletic fields, replacing grass that required thousands of gallons per week. But these efforts were localized, dependent on volunteer labor and grant funding. There was no citywide program to ensure equitable access to water-saving infrastructure. The drought revealed what had always been true. Los Angeles was not one system, it was many systems layered on top of each other, serving different populations with different levels of access and resilience. In the winter of 2016, it rained. Not enough to end the drought, but enough to raise reservoir levels and ease immediate pressure. Snowpack in the Sierra Nevada reached 70% of normal, low but not catastrophic. The State Water Project announced a limited allocation for 2017. Mandatory restrictions remained in place, but enforcement softened. Fines dropped, warnings replaced citations. The crisis seemed to be passing. But the relief was temporary, and people knew it. Water use crept back up, though not to pre-drought levels. Some residents returned to twice-weekly lawn watering. Others kept their yards dry, having accepted the new normal. Surveys conducted in late 2016 showed that most Angelenos believed another drought was inevitable and that future restrictions would be stricter. The optimism that had defined the city's relationship with water, the belief that engineering and infrastructure could always provide enough, had cracked. Trust in long-term supply had not returned. The city launched public campaigns emphasizing permanent conservation. Billboards urged residents to treat water as precious. Schools taught children about the limits of the aqueduct system. New building codes required low-flow fixtures and drought-resistant landscaping. These changes were framed as progress, but they were also admissions. Los Angeles could not assume abundance. It would have to manage scarcity. The rain had bought time. It had not solved the problem.
The water system held, but only through reduction. By the end of 2016, Los Angeles had cut its water consumption to levels not seen since the 1970s, even as its population had grown by nearly 2 million people. The restrictions worked not because infrastructure improved, but because behavior changed under pressure. Lawns stayed brown, pools stayed covered, showers got shorter, restaurants stopped pre-filling water glasses. The savings were real, but they came with a cost. The city's appearance had changed. Neighborhoods that once advertised green abundance now displayed arid pragmatism. The psychological shift was harder to measure, but just as significant. People thought about water now. They noticed leaks, they tracked usage, they knew which days they could irrigate and which days would bring fines. The invisibility of the system had been broken. Yet the underlying dependency remained. Los Angeles still pulled its water from the same distant sources. The aqueducts still crossed the same deserts. The reservoirs still relied on the same snowpack. Nothing fundamental had changed except awareness. The system had been tested and had survived. But survival was not the same as resilience. Engineers and water managers spoke carefully about the future, emphasizing adaptive strategies and efficiency gains while avoiding guarantees. They knew what the data showed. The drought of 2012 to 2016 was not an anomaly, it was a preview.
Los Angeles today has nearly 4 million residents within city limits and over 13 million in the greater metropolitan area. It continues to grow. New apartments rise in downtown and Koreatown. Tech companies expand in Playa Vista and Culver City. The population is projected to increase by another million within 20 years. The water supply has not grown with it. The same 3 aqueducts deliver roughly the same amount of water as they did in 2015, minus what is now permanently allocated to environmental restoration and tribal water rights. Conservation measures put in place during the drought remain mandatory. Outdoor watering is still restricted to 2 days per week. Low-flow fixtures are required in all new construction. Lawn rebates continue. The city has invested in recycling programs that treat wastewater for irrigation and industrial use, reducing dependence on imported water by approximately 20%. Stormwater capture projects collect rain that once flowed to the ocean, recharging local aquifers. These efforts matter, but they do not eliminate the gap. Los Angeles still depends on distant snowpack, on rivers it does not control, on infrastructure built a century ago. The drought of 2012 to 2016 is over. The dependency is not. Every lawn, every faucet, every pool in Los Angeles is fed by a system that stretches hundreds of miles and relies on conditions the city cannot change. That has always been true. The difference now is that people know it.